There we go. Okay, now for real, Mike, go ahead.
So go ahead and call this meeting to order. And Brett, coming over to you. Okay. We will read our protocol for meetings, which we are now experimenting the first time for 2 years in a hybrid context. But since we have folks that still be joining by digital means, we will operate with these rules. The city is engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and board and commission members, as well as democracy for people of all ages, identities, political experiences, and political perspectives. More about this vision and project's community engagement process can be found at the link that is provided in the slide.
Yeah.
The following are examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines to support this vision. These will be upheld during this meeting. All remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. Obscenity, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupt or otherwise impede the ability to conduct the meetings are prohibited. Participants are required to sign up to speak using the names they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their own name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online.
Yes. And my apologies, I just realized that was probably the older one that we used to have. Mike Ernon is, or are you able to let Ernon in? Thank you.
Should I wait until he gets here to 2 minutes? If you just want to wait till he comes in. I was here for longer.
Well, we have a quorum, so
okay. I had a chance to look them over and thought they were fine. Yeah. So I would for 3 minutes. Good.
Yeah, second that.
Okay. All right. And so we can move on to public participation, and it looks like we have Paul here.
Hey, Paul, you should be able to speak now.
Well, I'm glad you guys get to meet in person. I'm Paul Conlon. I live in South Boulder, and most of you know my voice by now. I can hear Heather. Are you able to
hear us?
I can hear Heather really well. The rest of you are kind of fading out. I don't know. Can you hear me at all?
Yeah, I think my guess would be that's where the concept is. Welcome.
Hey, Paul, are you able to hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, now we can hear you.
But I can hear you really well, Heather. Whereas Brett at the other end of the room is kind of a struggle to hear what he's saying. So I don't know if you could have a microphone in the middle, maybe.
I may not have that capability tonight, Paul. Thank you for that feedback. We will make sure by next meeting we do have that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you, and I can make out most of what you're saying, 90% at least. Okay. So anyway, let me start my comments. I'm really happy that you're going to talk about the legislative priorities. And I'm really happy that you're going to talk about that some of those legislative priorities have to do with climate change. And I'm going to zero in on, I'm on page 18 of the packet, enhanced customer electricity choice. And I think this is really important that people are going to be up in arms this winter over their utility bills. Xcel has increased electric prices. They've increased gas prices, and they've put the PUC. I noticed that they're coming back for more. They want more rate increases. We need competition. It's just essential that we do something about this monopoly because we're going to have continued rate increases. I personally don't think it's a coincidence that these rate increases really started hitting after November 2020 when we went into a franchise agreement. I think we lost a lot of leverage at that point. And one way we might possibly get some leverage back is through an item called Community Choice Energy, which Representative Hooten put in the bill last year for the PUC to do the study. The PUC is now studying community choice energy. And hopefully somebody in the legislature is going to run a bill next year on community choice energy. And I really, really want the city to support that for all it's worth, because this is going to be so important to everybody in Excel territory, not just Boulder, that we put some pressure on Excel that says we can come up with some competitive wholesale electric markets to put pressure on your pricing. I'm a climate guy, and I obviously think there's some definite emissions advantages to CCE that gives you a choice of going with a supplier who can give you 100% of clean electricity. But I think the big selling point in this is going to be the price. People are going to be shocked this winter when they get their utility bills. And I have no idea how long I've been talking, but
I think that's about 3 minutes.
I just want to say thank you guys as usual. Thank you all very much for what you're doing, and let's just keep the pressure on. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for your continued feedback and joining the meeting every month. Really appreciate it. And I think Megan was the next. All right, Megan, go ahead. You've got 3 minutes to speak. If you
Hi. I can turn my video on too. Oh, okay. Well, at any rate, it's very nice to meet all of you. I am relatively new to Boulder. Got here just a year ago and just learned that these meetings happen and are open to the public. So I'm really just here to learn. That's all.
Great. Thanks, Megan. Nice to hear from you. I know, Megan. Okay. So, Hannah, you can go next.
Yeah, actually really similar to Megan. I just I'm interested in climate and kind of worked in the past and wanted to know more about what was going on locally. So just here to learn.
Okay, great. Thanks for participating. Appreciate it. Does anyone else join, or is that everybody out there?
That is everyone.
Okay, then we will move on to our first discussion topic, which is Carl today.
Sure.
Yeah.
And Brett, did you want to switch computers here?
Oh, yes, that's fine.
And then I will. Like Heather wants to take notes with that one.
Background.
There are a lot of things I need to consider for the next in-person meeting, I'm noticing. So thank you all for your patience, especially those of you who are online dealing with my clunkiness.
Thank you so much.
There you go.
All right, I'm gonna hand this over to you, Heather.
Thanks.
All right, well. Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me here to speak. Delighted to do so. Brett was the one that suggested it, and perhaps it was at your direction, but in any case, in case you don't know me, I'm Carl Castillo. I'm the Chief Policy Advisor in the City Manager's Office, and I primarily work on intergovernmental affairs. So we go to the next slide here. So in terms of what I want to speak about tonight, and it's not going to be a very long presentation, but hopefully we'll have some conversation afterwards, is I wanted to discuss a little bit about the policy statement. And in your packet, you had the that's interesting. I have the 2021 there in the little picture, but you should have the 2022 in your packet. And while the one that we're looking to approve for 2023 has not been approved yet, I gave this one to you because there really hasn't been that much change on the climate and energy front. And I wanted you just to see what a completed packet looks like, because it's very much the kind of document that we're putting together. The way it's designed, there is principles, things such as racial equity, collaboration, local control. Then there's positions, and there's positions like providing customers with an energy choice. And in fact, we very much do support the community choice energy bill that Representative Hooten has introduced in the past, and that we're now waiting for the PUC to study, and hopefully we'll get some recommendations that allow us to introduce a bill as the commenter suggested. We also have priorities. So among the many, I think it's like 60 positions, we pull out 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 that are priorities. And we do so because of a few reasons. A, because they're important to us, but B, because we think they're something that we can actually make progress on in 2023. And there's some viability. So we're not just picking a priority because it's important to us. There's a lot of things that are important, but there's actually been some research that's been done by myself and others that led us to believe that we can actually make some progress. So we'll speak a little bit about the positions and the priorities in this presentation. And I'm going to focus on those of interest to this board. And I'm going to give you a little bit about what I know that you might expect in 2023. So in terms of the purpose and use of the policy statement, it describes the city's goals. They're conceptual in many ways, but also provides some detail, because if you just said support clean air, very useless. But if it's so detailed, then you might not actually have the direction to combine it or connect it to a bill that goes in a slightly different variation. So it kind of walks that line between having a high level conceptual position with some detailed examples that are listed. And having this allows us to advocate at the state capitol, at the departments, the state departments, federal capitol, federal departments, DRCOG, RTD, the many governmental bodies, without having to run back to our city council, which would be pretty much impossible to do so given how fast things move at the State House. So it's actually kind of unique among our peer cities. Most of them do have to go to their council. So it's something that our council has trusted us with. We've proven that we've been conservative in how we've interpreted it. And as soon as we take a position, we communicate it to council so that they can correct it. And they could come back to me and say, Carl, good try, but you made a mistake when you supported that bill, whatever is the case. It generally doesn't happen because I am very conservative, and part of my job is to understand what the council's priorities are. And if there's any question, I might contact them individually. And so the policy statement we then use to, like I say, lobby before the many governmental entities at the regional, state, and federal level. And that includes, like I mentioned, RTD, DRCOG, the Rocky Flats Stewardship Council, in Colorado, the executive branch and the General Assembly, at the federal level, executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch to the extent that we sign on to amicus briefs. And you're all aware that we do sign on to friend of the court briefs where, let's say, the city of New York is taking on an issue on immigration. And they might say, Boulder, can you sign on? It's not exactly a legal issue. It's more of an advocacy effort. And for that reason, it's actually included as something that this policy statement allows us to move forward with. In terms of the most recent policy statement, we're almost done with getting the approval process complete. It started with looking at let me pause here for a second to say a lot of the timeline of the policy statement tracks with the Colorado General Assembly's schedule. It's not the only thing we advocate on, but it's perhaps the thing that it's most drives the timeline. So when the session ended last spring in May, that's when we started to review and summarize and brief our stakeholders on what came out of that. We then proposed some revisions. We took to the council's Intergovernmental Affairs Committee. We have 4 council members that sit on that body. And that was in August. We then went to City Council just last month, got some input. They said, good start, great revisions. Here's a few more we'd like you to make. And I'm now taking it back to council on November 17th for their approval. Hopefully that'll be on consent. That's traditionally the case because if I did my job right, I had received council's input on October 13th, and that is reflected in the document they'll be approving. Again, because I'm focusing on the state capitol, our first distribution of this document will be on December 11th. What's important to know is that when we advocate, we don't just use this document. In fact, I think you can agree that this is such a long document that it's probably overwhelming for most people that receive it. In many ways, it's, you look at the priorities and that's helpful. You look at the context, that's helpful, but not many legislators are going to have time to use this. So what we do is we put together other forms of communication. Of course, we just verbally communicate. We have lobbyists. I'll talk about that in a minute. But we also put together these things called policy snapshots, where we focus on an issue such as our open space lands and how we want to protect them from fires. In fact, I've been just working with Brett on getting input to finalize that. We have one on policing, one on homelessness, and so on. So that's another form of communication that comes out. And in many ways, they're products of this policy statement. So you have this great combination of a bunch of positions, and then we kind of drill down to what it can actually be used for advocacy purposes. And we'll be handing that out, both the policy statement and those policy snapshots at the legislative breakfast, which will be Senator Fenberg, Representative Amabile, and Representative Junie Joseph will presumably win. I believe she's either unopposed or very unlikely that the opposition will win. And then we'll make revisions to this in February after we've seen some of the bills come out. We find some bills that perhaps don't exactly, there are things that are important to us, but that we don't have clear guidance from council. We'll go back to council and let them know what's going on and perhaps seek some additional revisions to the policy statement. And I mentioned that because during this conversation, you all may decide, hey, I'd like to see some changes. And so there are opportunities, and you can funnel them through Brett, Heather, myself, whatever is appropriate. So our advocacy team include myself and Laurel Witt from the city attorney's office. We also have 2 state lobbyists from Headwaters Strategies. They represent us at the Capitol. They have full-time presence there. They represent other clients, but they are providing us a full service lobbying contract on all issues. We also have SDA in DC that represent us. So they are in DC and they represent us on federal matters. And then finally, the council is very much part of the advocacy team. No surprise there. Many times when we go to testify, people want to see an elected official be the voice. Not always. A lot of times there's somebody who's got the expertise, and sometimes that could be more convincing. So, we've had our police chief. I think I've had you, Brett. If not, I certainly have had Jonathan there, and we've had people from our finance department. So whatever the case may be, the point is we want to get somebody who's going to be both knowledgeable and persuasive. And that is at the state capitol, or that is perhaps even just individual meetings with our legislators or coalition partners. So I just mentioned that it's also people in the department. And I guess it's important to mention that folks like Brett are doing a lot of work behind the scenes. So there is an analysis of bills. There is drafting of bills. There is coalition work, reaching out to legislators. There is testifying. So these departments are the ones that are most likely involved. And it's actually coincidental, but it's kind of in the proximate order of the departments that are most involved in advocacy. So they are very much part of the advocacy team as well.
I didn't realize the transportation really has a big presence in this. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
It's of all the state and federal funds.
Yeah, transportation is so regional, and yes. And then finally, Humboldt Boulder, we're, they say we punch above our weight class, but nonetheless, we are just one city. So in order to be effective, and what I enjoy the most is the ability to work with partners to try to get them to sign on to our agenda, and then have a coalition and intergovernmental organization that can then lobby with their greater political clout and their lobbyists. So for example, the Colorado Communities for Climate Action is an organization that we helped begin 7 years ago. And actually Brett was one of the founders of the ideas. Now that organization has 39 local governments throughout the state. And with that, being the fact that they are representative of diverse demographics and parts of the state, their advocacy efforts are both ones that are consistent with ours because we're actively involved. We're either on the policy committee. In fact, Jonathan Cohn is right now the chair of the policy committee, or on the board, or we've been chair of the board. So in any case, because of our involvement, their policy agenda usually mirrors ours in many, many ways. And then they have lobbyists who have been very effective and increasingly players at the Capitol, as well as the regulatory agencies. Okay, so in terms of what are the positions, there's two. The first one is one that's titled Climate Change and Community Resilience. There's a lot here. In fact, you'll notice that these are 1 through 13. This is what starts our policy statement. Even though transportation perhaps has more involvement in advocacy work, I think climate change wins the prize for the number of, do you have a question?
Yeah, is this for the 2022 or 2023?
So this is as it's proposed for 2023.
Okay.
Yeah, so there might be some small differences. So anyways, climate initiatives wins the prize for having the most amount of positions. And I think it's, you know, it's very clear that climate is hugely important to our city council. So this policy statement reflects it. I think you all can read, but as you can see, it has everything that relates to resilience and greenhouse gas emissions and making sure local governments have the power to engage in climate action, all the way down to waste reduction and diversion and oil and gas industry. Did I make a bad assumption about all of you being able to read? It's kind of presumptuous.
Graduate high school.
I know. So I know Boulder High Schools. Not what they used to be. No. So the other position is one that we created in recognition that not all things are climate. Occasionally we have pollution issues that really are more of a regional air issue or a regional ecological issue. And so that's what this position is about. And I highlighted positions 49, 52, 53, which are ones that are more likely of interest to this group. Again, I know that you can read, so I won't repeat them, but there are things to be aware of. Let's see here if I can. So I did mention that we do prioritize positions. In fact, in this case, what you see before you is a position that is a combination of one on resilience and on wildfire mitigation. And it's actually very much come out of my work with Brett, recognizing a couple of things. One, I'm sure you're all familiar with the effort to increase the urban canopy to reduce extreme heat. And of course, you recognize that there's a tremendous need to take care of our wildlands in terms of prescribed burns and other treatments that are necessary to decrease the odds that we have a Marshall situation in Boulder. And what Brett has brought to the table is the fact that both of these have trees in common, and both of these have the potential for a workforce, an equity-centered workforce. We are training people with the ability to both thin and cut down and plant. And of course, there needs to be a coordinated effort to do it in a way that has the science that allows us to know what are the correct species and what's the correct time and all of that. So the priority that we're looking to further, both at the state and federal level, is to try to get support both at the State House, among the governor's office, among Congressman DeGoose's office, and among the U.S. Forest Service. And we have meetings that have begun on all fronts to make sure that we can have a great opportunity to get our share of the Inflation Reduction Act funds for wildfire mitigation and urban canopies, and then some. And to do so because we've proven that we are a case study on how to do it efficiently and effectively. And perhaps the U.S. Forest Service might even agree to give us money in advance so that they can show other cities how this can be effective. So Brett, am I catching on?
Yeah, you're doing great.
All right, cool. And as I mentioned, these are, so what you saw before was a table of contents on positions. This is actually a snippet of position number 4, which speaks towards wildfires. And I've highlighted the portion of the position that justifies or that supports that priority. Another priority is clean air, restoring or at the very least improving clean air in Colorado. And we think this is another one that has a big equity focus. So much of the poor air pollution is, as I understand, for people who live closest to interstates, people who don't have safe spaces to avoid air pollution on days where some of us can go into air conditioned, safe homes. We want to address air pollution in a variety of ways. And in fact, I will go to the next slide to talk about some of the examples of how we'd like to address it. First, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment got additional funding at the last session, and we'd like to make sure that they use it effectively to do more enforcement of some of the high pollutant emitters. In fact, part of the funding that they received was to identify who those high pollutant emitters are. So that'll be one of the things we're working on. We'll also be working on decreasing combustion appliances. I always thought of them as just an internal, well, I guess I thought of it more as a natural gas is going to make you have asthma or have other air problems. But increasingly, I've recognized, I've been educated by Carolyn Elam from the climate team that it's a significant contributor to the natural gas that then leaks out and contributes to our ozone problem. So that's another thing we'll work on. Likewise, motor vehicle exhaust. I understand that there's many vehicles that pass emissions, but then either are tampered with, their mufflers and their catalytic converter, or sometimes in the effort to make it more efficient or to make it louder, people will create, they'll increase their emission. Yeah, I forgot they call it rolling coal, or there's a variety of vehicles where people intentionally try to make it noisier and oftentimes more polluting. And there's technologies out there like things that cars will drive underneath these devices, this technology that can actually measure the emissions that are coming out from vehicles. And that could be used to require that owner of the vehicle to get an early emissions test. So that's something that we've already begun to speak with Senator Fenberg. And then lastly, I was speaking about those who don't have the luxury of avoiding those really poor air days. And we'd like to make sure that they are provided some safe indoor sheltering. I think that's going to become increasingly important combination of poor air and extreme heat. I think that's something we're going to be on the forefront of advocating for. Okay, so this is my last slide, what to expect in 2023. Geothermal electricity production. I understand that this could be a really exciting way to provide the stability, the base load that you would need to kind of stabilize the intermittent benefits of solar and wind. And especially on the industrial scale level, I think the state of Colorado is looking for ways that we can become a leader in providing geothermal energy. It's apparently very underutilized here. I heard, this is unrelated to what I heard from the State House, but that oil and gas wells can often provide a gigantic, it can be a resource for a lot of the heat. In fact, some of these orphan wells can be tapped into for that. So while we often have a lot of concerns with our oil and gas extractive industry, they may be part of the solution in terms of offering some geothermal. So that's pretty exciting. What exactly that looks like in terms of legislation, I don't know. Likewise, another renewable energy source, which is hydrogen. So we're, of course, very interested in electric vehicles, but as I understand it, when we move over to heavy duty trucks, electric vehicles is not often something that is sufficient to provide the energy that a large heavy truck is going to need. And so they are apparently the perfect candidate for trying out clean hydrogen. So we can expect some legislation, I've been told this year, to provide a clean hydrogen hub or hubs in Colorado. Also very exciting. So there was a bill that was introduced last session that would have required EV charging requirements and pre-wiring for apartments, commercial, multifamily. It was killed because it was determined that by the governor's office that it was going to be too expensive. However, we expected to come back this time, and this time with the support of the governor's office. And I'm getting some head nods. Hopefully that means that you're hearing the same encouraging news. So that is the third bill. This is not legislative, but this is actually very exciting and important. You know that I think we're one of the first states to require a greenhouse gas carbon budget of our regional transportation plans. And you know that this passed already through the State House, and then it passed through regulatory. The Colorado Department of Transportation adopted a regulation that took it to the next step. Now it's a question of making sure that the MPOs, the Metropolitan Planning Organizations of the world, in our case, DRCOG, the Denver Regional Council of Governments, implements it. And that's going to be tough. If you think that passing the bill and the regulation is tough, it's going to be a lot harder when you have a variety of cities who really have a lot of desire and political clout to get their share of what they traditionally have known to be their traditional financial share of federal government dollars for transportation purposes. And now it's going to be tied to proof that it has a smaller greenhouse gas footprint, which is often means density and walkability and transit friendliness. So that's going to be an interesting effort that we're going to be involved with as well. Finally, you know that a lot of money has been made available by the infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act that would go towards resilient purposes, to climate purposes. A lot of those programs are still being created. In fact, I don't know of any yet that are actually already receiving applications for funds. So our efforts are tied with making sure that we're involved in the creation of those programs. For example, on urban canopies, there's $1.5 billion that is available under the Inflation Reduction Act. So we want to shape how it's going to be, what the criteria are going to be, what the program is going to be like. And then, of course, we want to apply and we want to be successful, and we want to do so in conjunction with other governmental bodies when that is makes our applications more compelling.
Carl, are you saying that even in the infrastructure bill that was passed the year before, that stuff is still not even really in the ground yet?
Yeah. I have not. I actually get our federal lobbyists give us a lot of updates on meetings to inform the criteria and guidance that's being considered. I have not received any that are available to local governments that are already on the ground. So it's unfortunate because it's somewhat ironic, because I think from a political front, our elected officials and the president wanted to make sure that this helped change the political climate and provided employment and maybe even address inflation. But the truth is that in terms of it hitting the road, no pun intended, it's going to take a while. In fact, some of these will probably take 5 years or more to get the funding out. Wow. Yeah. In fact, if you'll know, but the electric vehicle incentives are ones that are limited to industries that have a certain amount of electric vehicles that are produced in the state or in the United States, and use a battery that is similarly manufactured in the US. That's a perfect example of a funding source that's going to be incredibly limited until the industry can adjust to produce electric vehicles and batteries in the US. But in the long term, it should be fantastic. I'll just pause. Last thing I'll say, in case you didn't know, and I think it's hugely important, that the Inflation Reduction Act was the first piece of federal legislation that actually said that greenhouse gas is a pollutant, which is hugely significant. I mean, up until then, we've had to rely on administrative regulations, and we've been second guessed by the Supreme Court about whether or not this is too big of a leap. Maybe we need more direct legislation. So we haven't had even the actual law to say that greenhouse gas is an acknowledged problem. Now we have it. Now it's part of the Clean Air Act. So it's on the same level as ozone and particulate matter. So I didn't know about that immediately when this came out. Sounds like you guys have heard of it. Anyway, it's fantastic. It's hugely important, and something that'll be very unlikely to be undone, which is great too. So that concludes my presentation. So I think I will hit escape here. So people, I think it's easy to turn it down.
Stop sharing.
Stop sharing. All right. So I said a lot. I hope not too much, but really interested in hearing your questions and comments on the process and some of the bills that we're looking to work on.
Great. We usually go around and give everyone a chance for clarifying questions and comments. So then do you want to go ahead with the questions?
So I think what you guys have done is really good in terms of the goals and the policies. Now I'm just more curious about how the whole process works. So you create a statement, which I guess if I was working on a project, it's like kind of like the goals or what I want to get out of the project. I guess I'm thinking like, okay, if somebody gives me a project, they will send me a statement, kind of like what I want out of the project, right?
Yeah,
But I still have to code it for myself.
right.
So I still have to code it, so I have to do the research. So who actually writes the bill?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
How does that process work? Like who, yeah, I guess the first question would be like, who do you send the statement to? Is it
Yeah.
like to the one of those city organizations,
Mhm.
and then they send it to the legislators? Do you send it to every single legislator? Do you send it to
Right.
some sort of capital body that, like, how does the broken telephone?
Yeah, it's a great question, and hopefully that will allow me to kind of let you into my world. So policy statement was approved 2 years ago. One of the positions was to lift the cap on 120%. Up until then, there was a law that said that you cannot produce more than 120% of energy from solar, on-site solar, 120% of the amount that you've used in the previous year. We thought that was limiting. For example, we wanted to make sure that people who look to expand their electrification of their homes or to get electric vehicles weren't going to have an insufficient solar array. So what did I do? So with that policy statement, I went to Senator Fenberg and I said, Senator Fenberg, we'd love if you could carry a bill for us that would further these means. And he says, we're very interested. Let's see some ideas from you. So I worked with Jonathan Cohn, I worked with Carolyn Elam, Matt Lehrman, and we started giving an outline. And he's like, okay, this is great. Let's think about who's going to be opposed to this or who else need to get supportive of it. So he started to identify some of the stakeholders. We continue to be kind of like the lead drafter of the bill, and we got our state lobbyists to start helping us identify co-sponsors at the Capitol. And then literally, at that point, you need to herd the cats and making sure that they're there for testifying, so that every person that's in a coalition is reaching out to their legislators, so that so much of it occurs in the hallways of the Capitol. So we want to lock in the votes in advance. So that's what we were starting to do. Luckily, we had then Majority Leader Fenberg, who has a tremendous amount of influence in and of himself, but he relies very much on us. So that's an example of a proactive bill that resulted from the policy statement.
So in that case, you guys were the bill pretty much, or you were like the main contributors as well.
Yes, I think it's always kind of perhaps inappropriate to say that we wrote the bill, because there's always the senator or the representative is always the final voice on what goes into it. But we are providing examples, we are providing draft languages, and there's actually a legislative drafter at the Capitol who takes stuff that we provide in kind of conceptual form. Sometimes you can actually put it into the statutory references and so that's an example of like a very proactive version of a bill.
Okay.
Right now, well, actually, I would be getting ahead of myself if I mentioned that example. And part of the challenge with this is that a lot of it is sensitive. You don't want to get ahead of a legislator who wants something. You don't want to get ahead of a coalition partner who says, hey, I wasn't ready to announce that. So I can't give any examples going forward, but let's just take another example of a bill on transportation. The transportation bill that passed that provided fees, that raised the amount of revenue available for transportation through a variety of enterprises and fees. That was a bill that we knew we couldn't take a lead on it. But what we did know is that we were part of two major organizations that could be very influential. One was the Metro Mayor's Caucus, and Mayor Sam Weaver was very much a leader in that organization. And when some of the mayors were saying, I don't like this because there's not enough money coming back to the Denver region, he started to work on some language that would help to balance out the funding that would go to the Front Range versus the rural areas. Meanwhile, the mayor and I are working at the Northwest Mayors and Commissioners Coalition, which is kind of the US 36, the Longmont, Lafayette boundaries. We're trying to get their support. And that wasn't easy either. We had, some cities that were basically saying, a variety of concerns, including the fact that electric vehicles shouldn't be the things that we're prioritizing. We should be prioritizing other emission reductions. So that is an example of how we took the council's approved policy statement and their position and then advocated for a bill that was already being introduced. I mean, it wasn't our idea. We knew it was coming, but we worked to react to the bill that was introduced, to build a coalition, to have some things adjusted in the bill, and to then testify ourselves and to make sure that these other bodies that we're members of testify. So we play a part. And, I mean, we're always playing a part. There's never a bill that's passed that's like going to have City of Boulder as the sole author and advocate for it. In fact, as you know, sometimes Boulder comes with its own baggage. So we may often, I have a bill right now that I'm working on, which I can't speak about, but I'm looking for a statewide entity to be the face of it. It's going to be much more persuasive. So it's not going to just be dismissed as a Boulder bill, not that Boulder isn't seen as a leader. But sometimes they say, well, of course you support that. You're Boulder. It's like, let's hear from some of the other non-likely candidates. Does that help?
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
Great. Anything else, Amanda, do you have any clarifying questions?
I have some more specific clarifying questions.
Sure.
On that, but you mentioned on one of the slides, cap and trade. Or,
Yeah, financial mechanisms. Yeah, I think it was more cap rather than trade. Yeah,
okay.
because that is the capping of greenhouse gases is much more politically palatable than trading. Apparently, that's seen as a little too capitalistic for some environmentalists.
Oh yeah, okay. So what exactly were we talking about capping? Which industries, or entities?
Great question. So I think when I first came on, it was really just to allow us to sign on some federal efforts to ask the federal government to do it. Since then, we now have a very bold, aggressive statewide greenhouse gas reduction, and it's got industry standards.
Mm-hmm.
And the governor, I think, has been doing an excellent job at getting as much voluntary reduction from much of the industry. So oil and gas, the building sector, transportation sector. Most of us feel like at some point we're going to have to put caps on certain sectors. So, for example, I think oil and gas may be an example of it because there's a limited amount of players, unlike vehicle owners, where you can't put a cap on it because you just can't control the hundreds of thousands, millions of people who have cars. Whereas there's only so many pipes and outlets for emissions that come from the oil and gas industry, certainly the extractive industry. So that's an example where a cap may be appropriate, and we would advocate, and we'd be turning to our climate coalition advocates to help us with that. That's a perfect example where they have been leaders to push the governor's office to consider caps and not just performance standards that may not lead to the resulting greenhouse gas reductions that we'd like to see.
Okay. So it was more just a general idea, and we're still looking at the industries or some of the opportunities for caps.
Yeah. So I think that is an example of there's a lot of positions here that aren't quite actionable right now, although that one could be. I mean, it could very well be that we're looking in 2023 at lobbying for a cap on the oil and gas industry, and this would give us the authority to do that.
Okay. I was also surprised. I've never heard of these devices you mentioned that measure emissions.
Yeah.
Like when you're driving.
Yeah.
Was that something?
I've never heard of those either.
Yeah.
Cool. Really tech.
Yeah. I'm wondering how much they cost and how much of a problem it already is, if there is a cost benefit analysis of the devices, like how much would they cost, how many of them would you need, and in which places to install, and how many cars would actually benefit, car owners would benefit from knowing this data and would actually go and get their emissions changed.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a really good question. It's actually a concept that I've never seen. I never noticed it. Carolyn Elam brought it to my attention. And I've had others that I've spoken to about this say that, yes, they're aware of the technology, it's used in other states. So great questions. These are, in order to be persuasive, we'd have to have answers for this. So that's just kind of reminding me of the kind of research I'll need to do to kind of advocate for that.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, well, it's interesting, and if it's a significant problem and like the cost
Yeah.
benefit analysis works out so that we're not spending huge amounts of money for like 5 cars. you know,
Right,
to
right,
do
right.
Something like that.
That's a good
But
point,
yeah.
because I would have thought that most cars are modern enough that they're fairly clean, you know, they're not tampered with, but apparently that's not the case.
Well, the noise, I do get that.
Yeah.
And noise pollution is actually a very interesting topic about like how much it actually affects you psychologically and health wise, but yeah, for actual like emissions. I'm just not sure. about
Yeah,
that.
so the Colorado Municipal League is looking to support a bill that would limit the amount of nuisance
Mhm.
muffler-free vehicles. And so one of the things I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say, hey, that's a great idea, and why don't we kill two birds with one stone? Can that bill be something that also addresses the emission issues?
Yeah.
They usually go hand in hand. You're cutting your muffler off and you're putting a dually on, you're probably cutting your catalytic converter off, because it's like limiting the pressure. Yeah, so
Okay, so they're connected.
I mean, not necessarily,
Yeah.
but I doubt you care too much about pollution if you're going around intentionally trying to make a lot of noise.
Yeah, I was also curious because there was a bill last year for geothermal energy in Colorado, and there were a lot of interesting discussions. I'm not an expert in geothermal energy, but I know some people who know a lot more about it, and they were saying that there aren't really sources for that are hot enough in Colorado for geothermal springs and stuff like that to actually generate energy. And the bill was written. There were some, I guess, questionable language that was used about what geothermal even was defined as.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure that we're careful with if we're talking about, you know, geothermal heat pumps or just heat pumps in general, not geothermal heat pumps, but that we do some more research on what's actually available in Colorado.
Yeah, thank you. Good points for me to consider. And my understanding is that we're talking about kind of industry scale, like, so not something
Yeah.
that you can do in your own neighborhood.
Yeah, I think that's what they were saying was not quite available. in
Okay.
Colorado, but if
And-
there is research on that, then I'd love to see
Yeah,
it.
well, I got it from somebody who really should know. So I'm a good source that there is the ability to do this in Colorado, and there was a recent NPR story saying that oil and gas wells can be a perfect.
Oh, the oil and gas wells, I wasn't talking about, I was talking about specifically like geothermal energy through
But-
like hot spring.
Oh, from hot springs. Okay, so yeah, apparently orphan wells
Yeah.
are still accessing, you can still access some heat from down there pretty easily, but I don't know anything about this. It's fascinating though.
And then I think I'll do my other questions for later.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment briefly on the people who modify those engines. So one of my day jobs is I work at Good Times, the fast food restaurant. You can always tell, car's loud and it smells awful, truly terrible. And I mean, so you mentioned that you were working with Senator Fenberg on something around that.
I had suggested it to him, yeah.
Cool. So I'm glad to hear that they're working on that, because it is a really unpleasant noise-wise, unpleasant smell-wise, and not great for the environment for people to be doing that.
Yeah.
Not great. But the other question I had was, so say for the 2022 agenda, you know, one of the priorities is, I don't know, pulling something out of the hat, just increasing solar panels statewide.
Mhm.
So theoretically, that gets turned into law through the legislation. How long is the process from council approving the agenda and priorities to actually getting that one, put into law on average?
On average,
'Cause
on
I know it
average,
varies wildly
yeah, I mean,
bill to bill.
frankly, when we have, I mean, obviously, we're nonpartisan, but the Democrats are clearly more aligned with 95% of our positions.
Right.
So we have made leaps and bounds in the last 3 years,
Okay.
4 years, I guess,
Right.
since we've had Governor Polis and we've had a majority in the House and Senate, and we've had Speaker Becker and now President. It's huge. We've checked off so many.
Right.
So I certainly can't say how on average, but we've been successful in our in furthering advancing our priorities every year for the last 3 years.
Wow.
That we've been able to say each one is checked off in some regard. We've had like a lot of mobile home legislation, for example. And so usually that means council approves it in November, and by May or June at the latest, it's law.
Okay,
Of course, we can never say, but for boulders that will happen.
right,
And that's part of the challenge. And truly, we don't even want to say it.
Yeah.
Because humility is pretty important if you want to maintain relationships in the
Right.
intergovernmental world.
Absolutely.
So all you want to do is be a helpful partner.
absolutely.
And behind the scenes, you're drafting a bill, all the better.
Cool, thanks. That's all I got.
I don't have any further questions, but that was a really informative presentation.
Very
great.
I learned a lot. That was fantastic. So I will circle back to you, Herman, for any other comments or thoughts.
I wanted to follow up on what Amanda said. So you explained how the drafting of the bill works and how you have to network and get co-sponsors and all that.
Right.
So at which point would you call like more like expert or researchers that know more about the scientific data behind the bill? Like if you were drafting a bill for geothermal energy, you may have some points that you can give to the drafter at the Capitol, but at which point does somebody who works on this industry or does research on this industry come into play?
Immediately. So right now I'm working with a national expert on one of our bills. And we're super early in the process. Mobile home legislation, we work with, I think her name is Isabel McDermott, who was a national expert on mobile home, on right of first refusal, and on rent stabilization, which were the bills that we were looking to work on. And so we went right to her immediately. We wanted to find out what was going to be unconstitutional versus constitutional, where it's worked in what states. So that's one of the first things we do.
Is she from Colorado? Or?
She actually contracted for Colorado for a while for Boulder on our mobile home strategies, but she's from Washington, state of Washington.
So for things like geothermal energy, would you look for somebody who was from Colorado who knows the topography?
So on this one, this is a bill that I know is going to go forward. So this is not one that I'm looking for the city to champion, but I want the city to be a champion, not to be the champion. So I am confident that the organization that is looking to introduce this will have some of the best experts to work on it. So, I mean, frankly, there are some bills that we're way more influential on because we're saying Boulder has expertise on it. Like with Brett, he brings so much expertise on a lot of the resilience issues. And on others, we're going to be a smaller voice. But, and I think on geothermal, it's like, we don't have any geothermal experts unless I'm missing something. So we'll be part of the chorus of people that will support it. And we'll try to encourage CC4CA, for example, to be supportive and make sure that they're actively supportive because there's different levels of support. Or are you going to dedicate your lobbyist time to go around and counting votes and do what it takes? So that's an example where sometimes we just don't have the expertise, and we have to acknowledge that. So from the outside, people don't see the difference. They just know that we're lobbying for something. But there's lobbying, for example, on that solar, 120% solar rooftop solar bill, we had quite a bit of expertise on it. And so we were able to draft a good portion of it.
Yeah, and sometimes too, the expertise is entered in the hearing process too. There's a second after the drafting piece. There's another opportunity for expertise, either direction, to come forward in that.
That's a good point. I mean, we do have a democracy, and we do find during the hearing people that we didn't even think of who have come because they have followed the State House's work, and they say I'm a PhD and I have 30 years and in this field, and here's what you missed. So there really is quite a bit of value that's added throughout the committee and second and third reading in the House, and then it goes to the Senate, and it goes to the same process, and then it has to be cross-referenced. So lot of opportunity for experts to point out mistakes and missed opportunities. Yeah.
Any points, further questions?
Yeah, so you had mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bill. And I think when you were talking about urban forestry or
Wildfire. Mitigation.
oh yeah, wildfire mitigation, thank you. You were saying that there were also additional opportunities to either get the money quicker or maybe get some extra money.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I just wanted to, I guess, caution us. I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that. I know that Boulder has a lot of issues and definitely had some big scares with wildfires, but I think there are some really at-risk communities across the United States that have less funding opportunities than Boulder does.
Yeah.
And I think especially right now, there's been more of a push for environmental justice and
Yeah,
serving at-risk people, even with the vaccine rollouts.
right.
First, and so I would actually offer that maybe we could use our voice to encourage the federal funding to go to more at-risk communities with less budgetary restriction, with more budgetary restrictions or less tax dollars that they can use for things like this first.
Great point, Amanda. That was actually somewhat brought up by our city council when I was talking about how we will focus on an equity-centered focus. They were like, well, who's equity? You know, is it equitable in Boulder or is it equitable throughout the state? And I said, I admitted, I said, you know, I hadn't thought of that, but equity doesn't have borders. And for us to say we're going to compete against a neighboring city, for example, to get more money at the cost of a city that has more need, that maybe they have more marginalized community members. That would be totally inconsistent with both what we want and our messaging. So I guess what I was trying to say is that I think we want our region and maybe our state, certainly the Front Range, to be a leader in this front. And maybe I defer to you, Brett, to kind of communicate.
Well, I'll just use the forestry, urban forestry as an example. So we actually led the organizing to create a regional consortium of cities to begin developing an urban forest expansion strategy so that it could have more equity orientation, both in where the intended urban forestry projects would go, and actually also to get funding to work with communities, because oftentimes urban forestry would just, oh, well, buy trees and we'll plant trees, and there was no resource to appropriately work with communities. But the other was because we don't do workforce development, and if we wanted to do true equity-centered workforce development, we needed to work with organizations in the Denver region and others who have that experience. So we've been building, very much like you say, a kind of regional approach, which is designed to help us build our urban forestry work too, but is really trying to broaden the net of all the parties of the plan.
Yeah, I definitely think that communication, regional communication and regional planning is very helpful. I just think that Boulder necessarily overall as a city has a little bit more financial ability than other surrounding areas to do work like this. So I would just caution if we're trying to get more than our share, I think is what you might have said at one point.
You know, that's actually a term that I heard our governor say just recently.
Yeah.
It's almost like everybody's parochial when you're looking. I mean, it's irresponsible for me to not try to get as much money for the city as I can get.
Yeah.
But you bring up a good point about, like, you know, it cannot be. Yeah, but be very thoughtful about it not sacrificing our equity values.
I do think it's really important in the context of climate risk to also note that Boulder has one of the highest urban wildfire risks and one of the highest flooding risks in the state. And so you have to be cautious, like when we say to the families that lost their homes in the Marshall Fire, oh, well, we shouldn't be proceeding to try to get funding to do, no, that's right.
Yeah.
So it's, I
Yeah.
totally agree. And I think that's part of the reason why in our climate work, we've said, we can't just work within our boundaries. It would be nothing if Boulder achieved some great emissions reduction thing and nobody else could. And so we've really been trying to champion this notion that we have to work at larger scale so that everybody benefits from the work that we're doing. But I think that said, I think the best way that we can advocate for some of these other communities with fewer resources is to create these consortiums in which they're a part of those.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I was more saying on the financial ability of the city to deal with these issues rather than like what that these issues are real and that they need solving. But yeah, I'll use the rest of my time.
But it's really, I mean, it's tough, right? It's a little, I will say it's different because the city has a budget of what, $500 million, and all the money is allocated already.
Yeah.
These are additional multi-million-dollar projects that could be 10-20% of the city's budget. I mean, the money, I guess, is there for the grabbing, and we have the resources to get it. So, yeah, perhaps they could go to a lower income community, but at the same time, we have the opportunity to take those funds and I guess manage them responsibly. We have really clear goals. I mean, it sucks, but it's just like the reality. Right? Like we have a really good environmental team here at the city that other communities may not have, and it's just because. I mean, I don't know. It's tough because I think the money's there for us to grab. We have the experts that can put the money to use, and I guess the best we can hope is that we use that money responsibly. And then we set an example that the other communities can replicate, hopefully for less money, because we already did the experiment.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to jump on this basically exactly that. Of Boulder can absolutely lead the way and pave the path for other cities to follow. And also, we've got a large budget for a city of the size that Boulder is, but we're not a very large city in terms of the country. And so if we can use the money that's being offered and given to cities to lay that foundation for other larger and smaller, more funded and less funded cities to follow through and build infrastructure for lower prices with less experimentation and faster, isn't it our civic duty to sort of do that and make sure that we have all of the resources possible to lead that path forward?
I'm just really glad you're asking the question.
Yeah.
Because I agree with everything that's been said, and it's really easy to get into we're doing our work for our community. And so I think we have to keep asking that question and asking ourselves, how is it that we're working to support these other communities?
And allowing people into the consortiums and not being exclusive is
Yeah.
a huge step, because we have the collaborations, R&D and pathways to make a difference, and people can come along and join that. And that's really powerful.
Great point, Amanda. It's just a reminder. And frankly, if we're not able to respond to questions like this, we're never going to be successful. So we have to be thinking about it.
I also just want to acknowledge Carl. He has a really hard job, and I really appreciate how you do it, Carl, and how you support all these different departments in the work and keeping track of all of it. And your diplomacy, you were chosen well for your job.
I grew into it. Well, thank you. And I mean, this has been very, very helpful for me and just really enjoyable, frankly, because for me, this now is part of the team, the idea is the suggestions that you gave me. And it just, it matters to me to know that you guys care, frankly, because occasionally it's a little bit in the quiet echo chamber, and something passes and somebody says, "Oh, that's good," like, come on, I thought this mattered to the city. So it's really good to hear from you guys that these things matter to you.
Oh, I don't have any. No.
Are you going to stay here for the next discussion talk?
What, no,
No.
No.
Oh,
did you want me to?
well, I thought we were gonna have some suggestions for the city.
Oh,
To do.
Yeah.
oh,
So, I won't
Okay.
necessarily for Carl.
Okay.
what was that, Brett?
Oh, we're about to work on our letter to council. Manual letter.
Oh, I see.
And that isn't something that goes through Carl, it just goes directly from here to
Okay.
council.
Do you have anything else to add before we? Anyone? Okay.
All right, this was a pleasure, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Heather.
Right.
Did you hire? All right, Carl, we still can't get you any dessert, there's, still some
We're
left.
good.
I'm good. I
There's an
actually made
upstairs.
a personal commitment on the done. That was through.
Never eating again. All right, then Brett will move on to the annual meeting of the council.
Yeah, I'll just make one more piece there now, suckers and, the desserts back.
Oh goodness, there's lots of sugar.
So
Get a discount candy.
it's that time of year, not just for Halloween and Thanksgiving and Christmas, but it's that time of year that we put together our annual letter to council. Now, I'm not sure we've gotten any guidance yet for this year. Last year, they changed the guidance and it was a much more abbreviated process. And so you notice in the packet, the letter was more like a one-page thing because that was sort of the guidance that we were given, like give us one page and answer these 3 questions. So, not having gotten guidance yet this year, what we thought we would do tonight is give you the opportunity to think about what you as a board currently think of as high priorities that you want council to really consider for this coming year of their work. And then I also wanted to go through with you some ideas that we've had with as staff about themes that we want to have you have the chance to be given briefings on as a part of your role as EAB. So and I'll get to that in a second. And it might be that even some of these are useful. So back behind you, not necessarily in the order of their appearance, but across the sort of 4 quarters of next year, I've displayed and sort of distributed 12 topics. It just happened to be that we were brainstorming, like, what are the topics that we think we're going to be working on and that we think that you would have some interest in, that range from urban heat and air quality to resilience and single-use plastics. And so much of what past environmental advisory boards have raised as issues that they wanted to see more activity in, or that they wanted to be more involved in, are displayed here. Mike's been on the board for quite a while, so he might have comments about if there's anything else that's missing. And then there are some new topics here that haven't come to before the environmental advisory board for some time, like leaf blowers. That we are probably going to give you a chance to have, that you will probably have an opportunity to hear more about and maybe offer your views on. So maybe just take a quick look at these, ask me any questions that you want to about these, and then we'll have a discussion about what the topics there might be that you want to move forward.
Brett, could we possibly read these aloud so the folks virtual can hear it? I don't know if they can see that.
So we have urban heat management and air quality, electrification of buildings, the broader all-encompassing climate action strategy of the city, transportation, electrification, urban forestry, often probably related closely to the urban heat piece, leaf blowers, land use and climate, building codes and climate, biodiversity and pesticides, climate-aligned purchasing and procurement, resilience kind of broadly, and single-use plastics.
Is there any intention behind the coloring of the sticky notes, or is it
No,
just to keep it
no,
fun?
No, there really isn't.
Okay.
Aesthetic. Yeah, just a little variety. I have sort of these in an order that I think that some of them might be coming forward. The electrification of buildings is an area that we've been working on for a number of years, and I think this year may become a real focus, and that perhaps early in the year, we're going to want to give you some briefing about. Similarly, we've been working for quite some time on an update to our climate action strategy. So I think that would be something that you're going to get a briefing on earlier. As Carl was saying, we're doing a lot of work around urban forestry and urban heat. And actually, there's a really interesting pairing of these three topics. So it's not really enough, of course, to just reduce temperatures outside if people's buildings, if their homes are still too hot. And so we're looking at the possibility of a kind of joint strategy, especially in our high vulnerability communities where we would try to improve the outdoor environmental conditions as well as access to cooling technology, and do that in part through both electrification and urban forestry. Transportation. So really, as you probably all know, the two really big moves on the carbon side were around transportation and around natural gas reduction. So these are really big aspects of this climate action strategy, both not human parts. Excuse me. Leaf blowers has just been coming up for several years, and now we're actually, as a department, going to be contracting with some folks to help us look at what the consequences of banning gas leaf blowers would be. This is a gas leaf blower issue. And basically around what the removal of two-cycle engines from landscaping might look like, if that would be possible, and what the implications would be. These two obviously go closely together, land use, but basically planning and land use, and the implications around climate. There's going to be a lot happening in the biodiversity and pesticides realm this year. In fact, we may be working on holding a major summit, maybe even a national summit on biodiversity and climate here in Boulder around this time. We have, and we're updating our IPM policy starting right now, and that will probably lead to some community engagement with all of you and others. And then there's some really interesting work. This is really in our circular economy team between single-use plastic. That's actually a piece that's coming forward in the, maybe in the legislature again this year. Some opportunities there, as well as, you know, how we use our procurement in the city. And then resilience is a big topic, which I know is going to come up again this year. And as the city starts to try to figure out how to take the next generation of our work in that context.
Could you speak just a little bit more to the climate aligned purchasing?
Yeah,
and procurement, the extent of that, and what the scope is.
And that's not just plastic.
Yeah, it's beyond that.
Yeah. So this would be about setting criteria for our vendors around. It could even, there's one side of this which is about what the values of the companies are. Like, are they heavily invested in tobacco and arms dealing when we're buying stuff from them? No, sorry, we're not going to do that anymore. Or it could be what's the carbon density of the material that they're using and how was it produced. So there's lots of different ways that could be used, right?
Does that also entail the bonds discussion that we were having session or two ago?
Yeah, it could very well. I mean, this whole field of how we start to use the markets in a variety of different ways. Yeah. And then resilience is an interesting one because there are climate change resilience issues, but there are broader issues that are not just about climate. There could be social resilience or economic resilience or other issues like that.
Yeah. And so what specifically would you be addressing through the building codes? Like, is there like a specific section of the building codes or just generalized building codes?
Well, we have been on a path for accelerated building codes now since 2014. We were one of the first communities to draft an accelerated building codes.
Right.
So I think we're on track to have all new buildings be net zero by 2031.
Sure.
That's the current code.
Sure.
I mean, some sizes of buildings are now already supposed to be hitting that. So there are some updates. There's a whole building code updating process that's going where they're thinking about kind of the next generation of those that Carolyn Elam and our energy team is working on. So, and we have a whole new cast of really remarkable staff in our land use department now, especially our comprehensive planning units. And they're really interested in starting to think with us about things like new codes and ordinances around both green infrastructure and gray infrastructure. So I think they're really interested to start thinking and to talking with, since especially this board is one of the boards that thinks most about climate change and how that fits in policy.
Right.
So.
In the building codes, are we also, or maybe it's related, but not in the building codes? Are we thinking about construction and demolition waste?
Yeah. That's probably more broadly in the kind of circular economy zero waste discussion, which it's sort of likely that if we were to do the single use plastics, we should probably just do an update on circular economy. Too.
Yeah. I think that would cover a lot more.
Yeah. Better. Right, badly added snow.
This is why I bought the new box of markers in here, right there.
It's a 2-year-old bag.
Those should be good.
Speaking of a single-use plastic.
Yeah.
At least we recycle those.
Oh, can you recycle?
The specialty recycling, we ship them all, yeah.
Ah.
So-
I know, like crayons, Crayolas, have a feedback program.
Wait, they would take back the crayons and like recycle the crayons?
And they would melt them down.
That's incredible. I love it. Do they not do that anymore?
I don't know.
Okay, so my question for all of you is, are there any issues, environmental or climate related, that are on your mind as being things that our council or our community should be really considering that are not listed here? Yeah, Amanda?
Our composting has gone a little bit sideways. And I think the first and foremost thing we should focus on in order to fix that issue is public education, because a lot of people move here from out of state or temporary living here and have not come across what composting is in their home states or home cities. So I think in order to decrease the amount of contamination in our waste streams, there has to be a continuous, not just a big one-time effort, education campaign.
So, Brett, so what's the purpose of this letter? So we send a letter to council. Why? Like, is it so things are undermined for later on during the year when we come to ask for approval, or is it such that they can tell the city manager to direct the team? Like, why do we do this?
So every year council does its own work plan.
Yeah.
Like, what should we as a council focus our attention on in terms of policy? And so this is the opportunity for this board and all the other boards to offer council feedback to say, for your next year in your work plan, please prioritize these issues.
So they always pick 5 issues, right? They picked 5 issues this year. Was it?
So the process changes. Let's just say it's somewhere between 5 and 10.
Yeah.
But usually, I mean, historically, things like climate is not usually doesn't end up on their priorities, right? It's usually like public safety. This year was like public safety, maybe your elections, occupancy laws, and then 2 more that I can't remember. So I guess in that case, our letter was to, I guess what was the purpose of the letter? That just to state what we want to do this year.
Well, let's take climate as an example.
Yeah.
Like, pretty broad topic, right?
Exactly.
Honestly.
Yeah.
So it would be a great opportunity because council will almost always say climate is still one of our #1 priorities.
Yeah.
We have all these other things. It's just sort of assumed that climate is there.
Exactly.
And therefore it's also sort of assumed that we've kind of got it covered but I mean, I've heard from council directly, as some of us have, that they are still very concerned about it and they want to know what we should be doing about it. So I think that if there are particular aspects of climate action that you think that the council should be paying particular attention to, this would be the opportunity to make that statement.
And I mean, even if it doesn't make it on the work plan, just getting a letter from a board that says, we think these are important, puts it on their radar. And so it might make it in on different issues and like, it might come up organically as opposed to being one of the work plan issues as well.
Well, I think I'm just asking because I want to make sure that we are as effective as possible, because I feel like last year we talked about the urban forestry project, but I haven't heard anything about it from council all year long, and I don't think it's on the work plan at all. So it's like, okay, so I guess for next year, how can we be, like, was a letter maybe too broad? Because I think we talked about carbon economy and urban heat islands. So I was like, okay, you read that, but it's like, what do I, like, from a council perspective, it's like, there wasn't anything that we said, like, you need to do this.
Well, the other way to think about this and the other way it sort of works is, if you say that that's something that's a priority, then when staff is putting quite a lot of time and energy into it, even if it wasn't something that council said you should do this, then council goes, oh, I'm glad they're doing that. That's something that our community has said is really important to us.
Okay.
So there's stuff that council doesn't direct our work plans, right? So theoretically, they do hire us because we're supposed to know what we should be doing. But it's good when the community gives them feedback and then they see that staff is doing what the community cares about.
Okay. Yeah. So for a letter, maybe we should pick like 3 topics or something, or 2 topics perhaps, not?
Yeah, I think that's typically good advice. I think we've had more in some years past, but it's better than more focused.
I wonder if under building codes, I could throw it as a specification, like garden rooftops. Of like trying to get that included in the building code.
Like green roofs?
Yeah, green roofs, those are great. Carbon sinks, they act as natural coolants. I mean, green roofs are great, plus they look cool.
They are a bit more of a challenge in an arid, dry environment.
I mean, yes, it is trickier depending on your location, but it can't obviously be a requirement to build a building, but if that could be encouraged through building codes, that's just a generalized idea.
Or at least allowable.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go for the easy hanging fruit and say maybe leaf blowers is not a priority for us.
Yeah.
It seems a little too specialized.
People complain about that a lot though.
And that is a really wide complaint across
I'm
all
not
of the
sure it's-
city.
Like,
It's going to be a priority for council because they're hearing so much about it. It
So-
doesn't necessarily have to be a
Yeah.
priority that you emphasize.
yeah.
I mean, since you're city staff, I guess what's something that you need council approval or help with, right? Because that's the thing that we should focus, because you guys are the ones that are implementing all these programs. And then the letter is more like the community, like almost like from the community, right? We're like, we are the community, so like the community has also these concerns. So it's like when you are working on the plans, they can refer to the letter and say like, oh yeah, the advisory board also has those priorities. So it's like, you need approval for funds or whatever, like I don't know how it works, and it will be like, oh yeah, like the advisory board wanted that to happen, so let's approve it. Like, so I think it's more like a question for you as staff, like what's something that you want the council to focus on, and then once if we all agree, we just give you your support, we'll give you our support in the letter.
Well, this is putting me in a bit of an awkward position because I'll need to speak for the entire staff on this, but I guess I would say there is a place that I think is a really interesting convergence of several of our major climate team efforts, and that is in this one, in the sense that it's actually quite a new idea to take a nature-based climate solution and a built environment climate solution and move them together. So I think that that's a really exciting, and also for us to really potentially move it at a regional level, just like we were talking before. This can't just be about, I'll just say quickly that we launched one of the first efforts to do heat pump adoptions in 2016. And it was a very interesting effort. We were very successful by certain statistics. We increased adoption of heat pumps by 400% because we went from 50 to 200 a year, right? When in fact our conversion rates need to be like 1,500 or 2,000 right? And so, and then we did the back of the envelope calculation. So we were giving out what we thought to be a lot of money, like $600,000 in rebates. Well, the actual cost of electrification of just the single family houses in Boulder is probably $500 million. So it just sort of was like, oh, the scale of this is not something you solve through a little incentives program, right? You solve it through a utility-based infrastructure change program. So we can't do this alone unless we move the whole utility and the whole service territory. And so if you imagine the kind of carbon impact we could have if we apply our incredible policy resources to moving the PUC, to move Excel, to make this happen. That's literally millions of tons of carbon and tens of thousands of new jobs.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Right? Yeah. And then if you did that in combination with a major urban forestry campaign, wow, I mean, like you make Polis look like he should be president.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's. I'm sorry, anyway, so Forest is running.
Always.
I shouldn't say that. But no, I'm sorry. All kidding aside, I think that really, because the other thing is this is the issue. We are facing increasing heat and increasing air quality problems, especially for people who are most vulnerable in our community. So I think that would be another thing to consider in your recommendations to say, yeah, do this, but make sure you start with the people who are most vulnerable in the community, especially as a template for how this can be done in other places to make sure that when you're moving this thing forward, it brings all the community along.
I agree.
So.
Well, was it a follow-up to what we were already talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, it seems like, I think it'll be a great topic to talk to present to council, but you are the one that knows all the finicky details about it. It's not like we can, if we read the letter, it won't be as accurate. So I don't know if we should take a different approach. I don't know if the board will agree, but maybe you can draft it and then we can read it, maybe change it a bit, but just basically sign it. Because I think like this topic is great. I think it's something that we can definitely get behind. It will be something good to present to council, but you're the one who's doing the work on this and you know all the detail, all the data. So I think it will be more effective and more a better letter if you draft it and then, just get our approval and signature.
Well, you have an expert or a person with a lot of knowledge in this, and I'd be happy to work with you on that, because I think that if you work with Sweet and others, you've done with one of the application, right?
Yeah, Sweet more so transportation of electrification, which is what I was gonna comment about, but yeah, I've done some urban forestry work and
Thank you.
Buildings, but I would take kind of a middle approach between what you two are saying, and I think if we could merge kind of what you think, what you're seeing from city staff as priorities and the raw data, if you have any raw data on any of these topics, and then maybe come with maybe one or two additions to that.
Oh, yeah. No, this is just one idea of the things that, this isn't the only one I would suggest that I would suggest you think of several. Yeah. And
I was going to say, I think that's so good. We have language from the past.
Yeah,
very.
The only thing I will say is I think from last year, the letter was like what, 1 page long. So it's like, I think really those 3 topics, that will be 1 page.
So it depends on the guidance we get from
Yeah.
right?
So it depends, I guess if it's the same as last year on 1 page, I think we're kind of constrained as to how much we can put in, because I feel like explaining those 3 concepts, for example, and then how they're gonna work together. If you do it right, that's a page right there.
well, let's keep brainstorming though. I was just throwing out a first place. So did you have another thought or another suggestion?
I was going to say that transportation of electrification, I think we could do something similar to what we're doing with those 3 topics by kind of combining transportation of electrification and just in general transportation issues by promoting public transportation and electrifying our buses. In addition to maybe working with Excel and with the PUC through, we're working with Excel through the PUC to do some vehicle to grid technologies, because those are huge batteries in buses, especially with school buses that are parked a major portion of the day. You can bring a lot of resilience to the grid, if you do vehicles with great technology. But it is kind of a big financial ask to electrify buses at the current moment. So it might be a little bit a higher political lift. But I think that, you know, we just had the August free month of public transport, and
That was pretty nice.
yeah,
It was great.
yeah,
It was
I
a
love
lot.
that.
Yeah.
But I think we should
Even though
continue
something-
on. Yeah, oh, I texted everyone I know about it. And I'm like, do you want to ride bus with me to Golden? And I was like, oh, it's like 2 hours to get to Golden. Yes, that doesn't work. But yeah, so I think if we could continue on this trend of promoting public transportation and alternative forms of transportation by electrifying buses specifically.
Well, that would be a good question to ask Carl though, because now that we have a connection, and that's like RTD stuff.
That's why I was asking.
So it's like, you know, it's more like,
Brainstorming more things.
that's like its own district, so it's like, I think that's separate from the city.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, I don't know, I think they're always pretty constrained for money, that district, so I don't know, like, will be something.
Oh, RTD, yeah, but I think we have city buses that are separate from RTD funding,
hub,
right? Yeah.
Which is electric.
Is the hub the only city bus, right?
The hub is the only line that we control.
Yeah.
Okay, what about the school buses?
School buses, that's school district,
Yeah.
but and there's a whole bunch of money in the IRA for school bus electrification.
Yeah,
I would just say, if we can move over to the, I'm interested in the climate line purchasing. I like the idea of,
Yeah.
you know, that's an avenue by which to change and that more systemic change, right? By using the money in contracts to enforce capitalism to change on our behalf, and it's like an avenue to drive that change. So I like that. I would second the leaf blowers. I don't know if it's a campaign problem. There's so much going on in the world. That's the last thing I want to focus on.
and
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think
if
we
people
focus on-
complain about that, they're gonna talk about it.
Yeah, you gotta
Yeah,
do
it is-
something
that
with
is-
that first.
So I think we could,
That is true, but I think if we focus on the climate aligned purchasing and from the letter from last year, when I think you guys were talking about, like social cost of carbon or some kind of cost of carbon,
Yes.
the leaf blowers will kind of take care of itself.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that
I
they.
think they'll just take care of
climate
itself. If
change.
we were running a gas powered one versus an electric, like there's such a pain in the ass versus so easy.
Yeah.
Like, no one's
But,
gonna-
but I mean, also, I don't think that compared to transportation, for example, that it's that much of a contributor to climate.
Yeah, and I think,
Going out to the-
and I think that also as
Every leaf blower.
as a sort of specialized group here, we have the ability to, because the entire community's bracketing about leaf blowers. People are unhappy about gas leaf blowers. As a specialized section of the community, you can lean on issues that are more specialized, right?
the other thing I will say is that when the time comes that it will discuss it, I think we should have some sort of statement or something to share with council already. Like, I don't think we're part of this letter or really part of, or, you know, many conversations, but I think eventually if it will come, then we should have something that's like, hey, it's not a big contributor to greenhouse gases, so not a priority of our board.
Right.
And our recommendation to focus more on equity, you know, like
Yeah.
maybe, I mean, landscaping is dominated by immigrants, and if an immigrant just bought $1,000 blower to start a business, I'm not gonna have like, you know, throw it away and buy an electric one.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, so it's like,
Or even the Denver Public Library, like their rental of equipment
yeah,
Yeah.
idea, and that REI I think is doing something similar for camping equipment, but.
So I'm saying we will probably be asked to bring it to you, so you can't probably say no. But so I think it's a great idea.
we can just get feedback on that.
Yeah.
So anyway, but I think that's a good idea, sort of having one. Amanda, Jeffrey.
So I have a couple of ideas. I don't know if they're going to be big enough to include in our letter, but since we're talking about policy, I'd just like to bring them up as something that we could maybe talk about, because we have quarter 1, 2, 3, 4 in here. The first one is kind of going off of composting, but less from an educational standpoint, but because of the composting facility plans in Lafayette not coming to fruition. I was wondering if there's any kind of possible way to use our ownership of our open land space to build a composting facility. It wouldn't be around residential areas for people to complain about smell or noise. And we have, however, if we're very committed to open space and open and environment, that having a composting facility is incredibly useful to preserving our natural spaces and contributing to reducing urban heat effects because of lowering carbon emissions from methane that goes to landfill.
Everything you're saying is true, and part of what the county learned, and actually in part what the county created now, is a very vocal citizens organization that has made it their priority to try to stop any sort of composting facility development. So
Anywhere?
Yeah.
Why? What are their reasons?
I'm not going to try to speak
Yeah,
for them,
yeah.
but I'm just telling you that's their stated objectives, partly because they don't necessarily believe that that those sites won't be used for biosolids and other things that they believe. And partly there's just a whole dynamic about it. So the majority of the land that we own that's not inside the city boundary is open space land, and that would be against the charter, the open space lands. And so that would have to require a charter change, which is
Okay.
something that none of us want.
It's a lot.
So there's a whole staff team of city and county staff working on this composting issue. The siting is just an absolute nightmare. There's essentially no zone site in either the city or county right now that could accept that. So what we've been working on, by the way, is a different approach to decentralizing the compost production
I know
process.
you were talking about biochar, but
Yeah, in small scale composting.
yeah, but
So-
they don't include the bioplastic. They don't accept those because you would need an industrial facility for those.
And there's growing question as to whether even that they really, but there's so many things that are being sold as bioplastics that are.
That's not true.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's a problem or challenge area that anybody wants to walk into right now.
It's worse than leaf
I'm-
blowers.
Believe me,
Well, and
active organic material is hugely important.
Brett, can I ask a question? When you said there's currently no zoned properties in the county, did you mean publicly owned property or do you even within privately owned property? There's not.
Well, I'm sorry, I was thinking also about, we looked at biochar facilities, but I think even in terms of, it would have to go through some kind of a special site review process with the county. Probably would have to be rezoned, and that process of going through that kind of thing is going to set up this whole dynamic of the people who are now sort of being opposed to these properties.
is that group that you mentioned, is that a government group? No, it's a citizen group that is working on the county.
Well, it's working on all levels against composting.
Okay. Well, maybe
You
that
have one of those
go
guys
into
for
an education campaign, in addition to educating people on what goes in the food system,
No, the important
the importance of composting, and I think similar, but a little bit different from the campaigns to educate people on the benefits of wind turbines and how not noisy they actually are. We could think about what kind of wording, what kind of messaging we could use around how beneficial composting facilities are.
It's a part of, you're right, and that's a part of what our staff, our staff.
I think, yeah, following up on that, like, as part of education, like, I don't think we should include this in a letter, but something that I just thought of is when I go to a store or a business and, you know, they have compostable recyclables, and they have, you know, pictures that say what's recyclable, what's compostable.
No, anymore.
They don't.
No, the city was getting too much contamination and they.
Well, I mean, I didn't know part of the comment. I mean,
Got rid of
that
the compost.
the pictures were never like what the store was selling. Right?
Oh, yeah.
No, it is. I mean, it's like, no, and I think at the farmers market, they do a good job. Like I noticed that usually the vendors have pretty much the same stuff. And, you know, the picture from the bins match what you have, you know, on your hands. But then when we'll go to a restaurant, for example, and they will copy on recycling, compost perhaps, the pictures never match. So I was like, oh, is this recyclable? Is this compost? Like, I have no idea. So we'll just throw it in the trash or we'll synthetic, I guess. I mean, one case. But, you know, as part of education, that could be something that promote businesses when they put the labels to kind of.
I think that what I'm hearing tonight is that we want to have our circular economy and zero waste team come in and do a presentation on a number of the things they're working on. Believe me, they're going to have a lot to share with you about the compost stuff. Because that's very great.
Perfect.
And single use.
I think
plastic.
it. Time to go changed.
Yeah. So I think let's definitely, and what I would say though is it's not in a place where I think we know clearly enough what the solutions are to be able to say to council, we should do this. But that's a thing that we are working on for sure.
I think I'll do it. Like it's another reason. I feel like the litter problem in Boulder has gotten tenfold worse in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Like just litter problem. So I think it's another reason that is important. Along the bike paths, particularly.
Well, a lot of it has to do with significant increase in shelter population.
But even I feel like I just feel like you're around town, just even where that's not, I don't think the driver, it just seems like there's a lot more there in general. I don't know why.
Well, good. So this is, I think, a little bit of a joint sort of purpose discussion. One is like, let's make sure we know what topics we want to have a conversation with you about. So this is clearly one that's got a lot in it. And actually, this team is also working on the purchase and procurement. So whether we can do all those in the same session, I don't know, but that's that team.
Yeah, I'm pretty curious about that climate aligned purchasing procurement. I am a little bit skeptical. I want to understand how it really works because, I mean, coming from my wife's family from Kansas, so you know I go there every month, and I know a lot of farmers, and I know that a lot of corporations are buying farmland in an effort to buy carbon credits. So the price of farmland has increased, but then these companies don't reduce their emissions; they just buy these carbon credits because they have the capital to buy farmland. So it affects the farmers. And, you know, they can say they're close to neutral, but to net zero, but it's not real, right? Those carbons are really carbon credits.
This isn't necessarily about buying offsets. This is about buying products from companies whose actions are aligned with ours, which could be things like even weapons or tobacco, or so it's not just about carbon.
Or like embodied carbon, if like there's concrete or cement has a lot of carbon that's emitted in the process of making cement versus like a recycled product that's used over again.
Okay, because I thought like maybe it will be like, oh, bike companies that are net zero, but are they really net zero?
Right.
Oh,
that's what I meant.
I
Like,
think it's great. I think those are all topics that should be.
Yeah, that's why I think that's such a good discussion to have, because you got good points, right? Yeah. Lay that out and think about how you do it properly. Yeah.
I think also it would be interesting to kind of similar to the climate aligned purchasing and procurement and embodied carbon or carbon based purchasing. Is it would it be possible / feasible to have like a carbon footprint requirement for businesses to know, like the businesses in Boulder, to know what they're already producing year to year, and then figure out what are the most beneficial changes that they can make.
I think that this conversation last year, maybe before you joined. I feel like it does have familiar. Susan, I think she was very interested in colorblind emissions from businesses, and I'm trying to remember that we talked to city staff, and it was like just really hard to measure. Like, if I remember, I mean,
Yeah. It's a little bit related to consumption-based accounting.
yeah,
So
okay, yeah,
There,
something like that.
there is, that's just another topic that probably could get put up here is consumption-based accounting. It's a whole broader set of ways of understanding, because, you know, just what energy use goes into something is only one aspect. So there's a whole different framework we're trying to, let's see, did I just say consumption, not must be getting late. Consumption-based accounting.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I'll tell you what, let's just tie up the conversation on the letter to council, because these are all very important ideas about what other topics we might want to have in the discussion with you. This is not, again, a place where there's enough done or known to be a policy place for the council yet. So what I've heard so far is interest in support of this piece, which has a lot of precursors into recommendations we've made in the past. This one actually too, but maybe especially how these potentially get put together. Is there a proposal or a recommendation around transportation here?
Buses, maybe in the school district.
So I think maybe I heard broadly, like, you think council should be focusing on identifying roles for the city in transportation electrification with a special emphasis on the ways that ties into public transportation and possibly the electrification of buses.
And I think we were talking a lot about climate purchasing.
Yeah, but again, this is not necessarily like well developed.
And so I wonder, with the extent of that grouping that we've sort of isolated over there, if we could just go with the two topics, the electrification of transportation and the whole big conglomeration up in that corner, and just really dive down and focus in and try and give specific recommendations, in depth, like background, and just really not necessarily put all of our eggs in one basket, but make sure that the eggs in that basket are very nice eggs.
Well,
Good. Some good Fabergé in there.
with the transportation electrification, I think it's important, but I'm not sure like what will be a recommendation, because I think the city is already, electrification of the city's fleet, I think it's already a major priority. I think it's already gaining motion, right? Like I think there is a whole electric.
The hub is electric.
So it's like, if we want to,
We're getting funding.
Did you say the bus thing was funded or planning to be funded? Is it?
Well, there's money. I don't think it's gonna pay for all the school district buses to be electrified, and that's a school district thing. That's not something that-
but there could be a letter that we send to school district as part of the environmental. I mean, I don't see why
I mean, do we have the jurisdiction to
we
just
couldn't do that.
like not in part of the send letter to council thing, but just send a letter to the school district? Can we just do that?
I think that's a little bit outside of your purview in terms of your charter and your role. And I think it would be starting to, if council wants to talk to the school district about things it thinks the school district should do, then council has that role, but not you.
We could talk to council.
I'll say it at the next PTA meeting that come along.
I'll try and bring on some folks.
So I think the other thing is to think about, again, is this isn't necessarily new, but it's the configuration of doing it together, this new, and to doing it at a regional level that's a little different. So I guess that just to call out for you, what might be kind of a little bit of a new feature there. And with this one, I'm just listening for what's the ask of council to prioritize support for transportation electrification. And how would council do that? Well, we We can make sure that it's in our building codes to try to make sure that electrification, we could try to accelerate the electrification of the hop, which is the one place that we do that. We could through our regional collaboration with other organizations.
Yeah.
That the council should advocate to RGB.
That's what I was gonna say, is that if we're writing about transportation electrification, it should not be in the capacity the singular capacity of Boulder to electrify its own transportation, but more encouraging council to use its legislative weight
Yeah.
to throw around at other agencies that have access to a lot larger area of transportation that they could electrify and work on making that less carbon productive. Productive is the wrong word there, but less carbon productive. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what the exactly correct word that I'm looking for is here, but I think the concept is getting across.
I don't know if an angle because you have the statewide, which is kind of, it seems like Carl's job
Yeah.
to lobby for that, and then on the regional side, they have the channel with the school district, so we can just encourage them to keep those channels open. Let them know this is a priority for City of Boulder, and if, they can lobby for that. I think that will be good.
Brett, would you mind just saying out loud what you're
Yes.
writing up there for Paul?
Yes, thank you. And I want to see if this reflects what the board's interested in. So on the transportation side, I'd say use regional and statewide influence to push for electrification of public transportation. Yeah, okay. And then emphasize the integrated strategy of this, both nature-based and built environments and the regional approach. Regional and statewide. Heather, did that mention?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good work. Thank you. I think, as you said, brevity is probably a high premium, especially the way we've been trending in the last couple of years. But I also appreciate getting the feedback from you all about what topics you're interested in, and that we've added one, consumption-based accounting, that we talked about quite a few things that probably involve the circular economy team. It's also possible, I just want to give you this kind of heads up, that we may go to a slightly different staffing approach for EAB in this coming year, wherein certain topics have maybe multiple months in them, and that the staff associated with that work would be the staff here. I mean, I'm seeing at least 2 sessions, maybe more, for our circular economy team in this segment.
Let's have been working on making that like a longer, like intentionally longer term, and like working on a specific bit or working on a specific bit multiple times.
Can we stay all 3 in our letter if we can? Is that what we've decided, or just to?
This one, what I've said, Mike, is I don't think we know enough yet around what the policy recommendation is, because it's still emergent.
Could we say something like continuing to focus on optimizing a circular economy and look to the future using and begin to investigate climate aligned purchasing as a.
I feel like it would be worth it to throw a sentence or 2 in,
Yeah.
but I don't think we should make it like a major focus.
Mike, you had a great, you want to just write, so we'll, what was
that, continue to focus on achieving a circular economy and investigate climate aligned purchasing procurement as a next step in achieving that goal.
And somewhere in there, compost too.
Yeah, compost. Parenthetical compost.
Ellipses, compost.
I mean, yeah, because I don't think when people listen to your compost for the circular economy, it's literally circular, uses paper. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just. Yeah.
So Mike, I think the second part of it, so I just added a few things there. Continue to focus on the development of the circular economy, particularly around organic materials and compost.
And investigate. Or begin to investigate whatever climate aligned purchasing. As a next step in optimizing or achieving that goal, achieving circular economy.
Right up here with the safety language.
Or we just laughing at these that put all the eggs in one basket. My daughter and I were watching Simpsons last night. We're just like, it sounds like you're putting all your eggs in one basket. And he's like, what would you have me do? Put one in each different basket?
It's very all your eggs in one basket.
Oh, maybe I should reassess doing that.
But you better make sure that the eggs in that one basket are very good eggs.
Yeah,
So maybe some family in there.
I saw a movie that said combined two of the statements into like one bad egg can rot the whole family.
I love the mixing.
Okay, are we almost at a wrap here?
I feel pretty good. 7:59. Look at that.
Look at that.
All right.
Nice, yes.
Why's the clock on the table and on the wall? Oh, because that's what, okay, I see.
Oh, that's why there's a new.
That's right.
I didn't.
And I think that's good. I think the only other business was to note that our next meeting is on December the 7th at 6 p.m.
Yep, all right, and is that going to be, are we intending to continue with the hybrid format for our meetings?
So we're told no.
Perfect.
I think we might find a better room as I'm trying to pan the camera. Sorry, Paul, if I gave you motion sickness with all the camera movement.
Guess at that time we can adjourn the meeting. Second. All right. Perfect. Thank you all. That was fun to be in person.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Good to see everybody.
it was lovely to meet people.
Yeah.